The alternator was completely dead. Carter Hayes wiped grease-stained hands on his coveralls as the smell of motor oil mixed with autumn leaves in the late afternoon air at Hayes Auto Repair. 3 times this week, the same Honda Accord had limped into his garage in Millbrook, Connecticut. The woman in the elegant black dress stood beside him, her designer heels clicking nervously against the concrete floor, while her 6-year-old daughter pressed her face against the car window, breath fogging the glass. "How much will this cost?" The woman's voice barely rose above a whisper, hands trembling slightly. Carter slammed the hood shut, the metallic clang echoing through the small garage. "Nothing. I'll fix it for free." Before the woman could respond, small fingers tugged at his sleeve. The little girl had crawled through the passenger window, her wide eyes filled with desperate hope as she leaned close to his ear and whispered, "She's my mum. Please marry her." Carter froze completely, his wrench slipping from his fingers and clattering to the concrete floor as those innocent words shattered everything he thought he knew about second chances. The woman's face drained of color as she heard her daughter's whispered plea. "Mila, what did you just say?" Her voice cracked, elegant composure dissolving like sugar in rain. The little girl's chin trembled, realizing she had crossed some invisible line drawn by adult secrets and unspoken rules. Carter knelt down slowly, his 42-year-old knees protesting against the cold concrete, and looked into eyes that held too much sadness for someone so young. "Hey, it's okay," he said softly, though his own heart hammered against his ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. The garage fell silent except for the distant hum of traffic on Main Street and the whistle of wind through the half-open bay doors. 3 years ago, this same autumn chill had filled the cemetery where Linda was buried. Carter remembered Ruby's small hand gripping his fingers as the pastor spoke words that felt hollow as empty tin cans. His 9-year-old daughter had asked the same question over and over, "When is Mommy coming home?" The memory hit him now like a sucker punch, swift and merciless. He had buried himself in work after that, fixing broken engines because he couldn't fix his broken family. Mrs. Peterson next door often brought casseroles and worried looks, whispering to other neighbors about how Carter Hayes worked too much and smiled too little. She didn't understand that the garage was his sanctuary, where the problems had solutions and broken things could be made whole again. Ruby spent most afternoons in the corner of the garage, surrounded by textbooks and the comforting sounds of her father's labor. She had learned to do homework to the rhythm of impact wrenches and the hiss of air compressors. Carter's rule was simple. Struggling families never paid a dime, while wealthy customers unknowingly funded his charity work. "Daddy says broken things deserve second chances," Ruby had told her teacher when asked to write about heroes. The teacher had called it wisdom beyond her years, but Carter knew it was just a 9-year-old trying to make sense of a world that had taken her mother away without warning or explanation. Now this woman stood in his garage with designer shoes and desperate eyes, while her daughter asked impossible questions with the fearless honesty that only children possessed. "I'm Isabel Morrison," the woman said finally, extending a manicured hand that shook slightly. "This is Mila. We're new to town." Her voice carried traces of careful pronunciation, as if she had practiced removing some other accent that wanted to surface. Carter noticed how she avoided mentioning where they had moved from, her sentences carefully constructed to reveal nothing while appearing to share everything. Mila's eyes darted between the adults, sensing undercurrents she couldn't name, but feeling their pull nonetheless. "Carter Hayes," he replied, his calloused palm engulfing her delicate fingers. "How long have you been in Millbrook?" The question seemed innocent enough, but Isabel's hesitation stretched a beat too long, her smile faltering like a flickering light bulb fighting against the darkness. "A few weeks," she answered, though her eyes suggested the story was far more complicated than those 3 simple words could contain. Mila tugged on her mother's dress, and Carter caught a glimpse of something unexpected. The child flinched when Isabel moved too quickly, a reflex born from experiences no 6-year-old should carry. The observation lodged itself in Carter's mind like a splinter, small but impossible to ignore. The alternator replacement would take 2 days, maybe 3 if the part delivery was delayed. "I can give you a ride home," Carter offered, wiping his hands again, though they were already clean. "Ruby's at school until 4, so I have time." Isabel glanced towards the street as if expecting someone, her posture shifting from grateful to guarded in the space of a heartbeat. "That's very kind, but we can walk," she said, though her heels and Mila's tired expression suggested otherwise. Carter had seen this dance before, the careful choreography of people who had learned not to trust kindness, who viewed generosity as a trap waiting to spring. Something in Isabel's past had taught her that accepting help always came with a price. "The Morrison place on Elm Street is 2 miles from here," Carter said gently. "That's a long walk for little legs." He nodded toward Mila, who was studying his tools with the intense fascination of a child who rarely saw such organized chaos. Isabel's defenses wavered as she watched her daughter's curiosity bloom in the presence of someone who didn't shout or demand silence. The garage smelled of honest work and coffee gone cold, masculine scents that spoke of stability and routine. For a moment, Isabel allowed herself to imagine what it might feel like to stop running, to plant roots in soil that might actually hold them. The ride to Elm Street passed in comfortable silence, broken only by Mila's stream of questions about carburetors and spark plugs. Carter's pickup truck was old but clean, the bench seat patched with duct tape that had been applied with careful precision. A photo of Linda and Ruby hung from the rearview mirror, catching afternoon sunlight that made the smiling faces seem almost alive. Mila stared at the picture with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "My daddy used to fix cars too," she said suddenly, her voice small and wistful. Isabel's hand shot out to cover her daughter's mouth, the reaction so swift and panicked that Carter's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "Mila, we talked about this," Isabel whispered, her voice sharp with fear that had nothing to do with traffic or strangers. The little girl's eyes filled with tears, and Carter felt something twist in his chest like a blade finding its mark. He had seen enough broken families come through his garage to recognize the signs. The careful words, the fearful glances, the way Isabel scanned every intersection as if memorizing escape routes. The Morrison house sat behind iron gates and manicured hedges, a rental property that spoke of temporary arrangements and quick departures. As they pulled into the circular driveway, Carter noticed how Isabel's shoulders relaxed only when the gates closed behind them. The next morning brought Ruby's first encounter with Mila, a meeting orchestrated by necessity, when Isabel appeared at the garage with car questions and nowhere else to leave her daughter. The 2 girls circled each other like cautious cats, Ruby's confidence bumping against Mila's uncertainty until common ground emerged in shared loneliness. "I wish I had a mummy like yours," Ruby said with the brutal honesty of childhood, gesturing toward Isabel as she helped Carter organize his tool chest. "I wish I had a daddy like yours," Mila replied, watching Carter show Ruby how to properly hold a socket wrench. The girl's innocent wishes hung in the air like soap bubbles, beautiful and fragile and impossible to ignore. Isabel possessed knowledge that surprised Carter, her understanding of automotive systems revealing itself in casual comments and helpful suggestions. "Try checking the fuel injection pressure," she said when Carter diagnosed a difficult engine problem, then caught herself and stepped back as if she had revealed too much. When he asked where she had learned about cars, her answer came wrapped in deflection and nervous laughter. "My father taught me." she said, which felt true but incomplete, like a story with crucial chapters missing. Carter found himself studying her profile when she wasn't looking, noting the way her fingers moved with mechanical precision when she thought no one was watching. Their first dinner together happened almost by accident. Ruby's invitation extended before Carter could stop her, and Isabel's polite refusal crumbling under Mila's pleading eyes. The meal was simple: spaghetti with jarred sauce, garlic bread from a grocery store bakery, and salad from a bag. But the conversation flowed like wine, easy and warm and tinged with the kind of chemistry that made Carter forget to guard his heart. Isabel helped Ruby with fraction problems, while Carter taught Mila the difference between Phillips and flathead screwdrivers. For 2 hours they played house with such natural ease that even the children noticed, exchanging glances that held more wisdom than their years should have allowed. The spell broke when Isabel's phone buzzed against the kitchen counter, its screen lighting up with a message preview that she quickly silenced. But not before Carter caught a glimpse of words that made no sense. Location confirmed. Moving in. The color drained from Isabel's face as she mumbled excuses about early meetings and bedtime routines. As she hurried Mila towards the door, the little girl looked back with eyes that held desperate apology, as if she understood that her mother's secrets were stronger than her own longing for normalcy. Carter watched from his front window as their taillights disappeared into the Connecticut darkness, leaving behind only the lingering scent of Isabel's perfume and questions that multiplied like shadows at dusk. The week that followed brought a careful dance of approach and retreat, with Isabel finding reasons to visit the garage while maintaining emotional distance that felt both practiced and painful. She would linger over coffee, her conversation revealing glimpses of sharp intelligence and carefully buried humor, then retreat the moment genuine connection threatened to bloom. Carter recognized the pattern because he had lived it himself in the months after Linda's death, the way grief and fear could make even kindness feel dangerous. But Isabel's wariness felt different, tinged with the kind of hypervigilance that spoke of threats more immediate than heartbreak. Their breakthrough came on a Saturday morning when Ruby's bicycle chain snapped during a ride to the park. Isabel appeared as if summoned by parental telepathy, her hand steady and sure as she helped Carter make the repair. "You're good at this," he said, genuinely impressed by her mechanical instincts. "I had to learn," she replied, the words carrying weight that suggested necessity rather than hobby. For a moment, her guard dropped completely, and Carter glimpsed the woman beneath the careful facade, intelligent, resilient, and carrying burdens that would have crushed someone with less strength. The moment passed quickly, but it left behind the kind of understanding that doesn't require words. Rosie's Diner became their unofficial neutral territory, a place where conversation could flow without the intimate pressure of home-cooked meals and domestic spaces. The red vinyl booths and checkered linoleum floors provided the perfect backdrop for getting to know each other in carefully measured doses. Isabel ordered her coffee black and her past in fragments, revealing details about her work as a financial consultant, while deflecting questions about her previous life with the skill of someone who had perfected the art of partial truth. Carter found himself studying the way she held her cup, the precise movements of someone accustomed to keeping her hands busy and her thoughts hidden. The diner's Saturday morning crowd provided a Greek chorus of small-town observation, with Mrs. Peterson nodding approvingly from her corner booth and Frank, the owner, refilling coffee cups while offering unsolicited relationship advice. "Haven't seen Carter smile like that since Linda," Frank whispered to his wife, though his stage whisper could be heard 3 tables away. The attention made Isabel shift uncomfortably, her eyes scanning the room with the practiced awareness of someone who had learned to map exits and evaluate threats. Carter noticed how she chose seats that faced the door, how her purse was always within reach, how she startled at unexpected sounds that wouldn't register with most people. The morning everything changed began like any other, with the familiar rhythm of bacon sizzling and coffee percolating and conversation flowing like honey over warm biscuits. Isabel had just finished telling a carefully edited story about Mila's adjustment to their new school when Detective Brooks walked through the diner's front door. He was an unremarkable man, in an unremarkable suit, the kind of person who could disappear in a crowd of 3. But his presence transformed Isabel like a switch being thrown, her entire body going rigid with a fear so profound that Carter could taste it in the air between them. "Excuse me," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the ambient noise of Saturday morning breakfast. "I need to make a call." Carter watched through the window as Isabel paced the parking lot, her phone pressed to her ear and her free hand gesturing with increasing agitation. Even from a distance, he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept glancing back at the diner as if the building itself had become a threat. When she returned 10 minutes later, her composure was rebuilt but fragile, like a house of cards balanced against strong wind. "Emergency at work?" she said, the lie sitting heavy and obvious between them. "We have to go." She left money on the table without counting it and practically dragged a confused Mila toward the parking lot, leaving Carter alone with his cold coffee and multiplying questions. The next week passed in a fog of unanswered phone calls and empty garage visits, with Isabel's absence creating a void that Carter hadn't expected to feel so keenly. Ruby asked daily about Mila's whereabouts, her disappointment growing more pronounced with each passing day. Mrs. Peterson reported seeing lights burning at all hours in the Morrison house, and Frank mentioned that Isabel had been buying groceries at odd hours, always alone and always looking over her shoulder. The pattern suggested someone preparing for departure, gathering supplies and tying up loose ends before disappearing into whatever darkness she had been running from all along. Carter's world tilted off its axis when 2 men in expensive suits appeared at his garage on a Thursday afternoon, their federal agent credentials looking official enough, but their questions feeling wrong in ways he couldn't articulate. "We're looking for someone," the taller one said, producing a photograph that clearly showed Isabel and Mila, though the names listed were Isabel Santos and Maria Santos. "Have you seen them?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a chemical fire, toxic and impossible to ignore. Carter's protective instincts, dormant since Linda's death, roared to life with surprising intensity. "Never seen them," he lied, the words coming easily despite his general commitment to honesty. "These people are dangerous," the shorter agent said, his tone suggesting that Carter should be grateful for the warning. "If they contact you, call immediately." They left business cards with numbers that Carter didn't intend to use, their parting words echoing in the garage long after their black sedan had disappeared down Main Street. The encounter left Carter feeling like he had stumbled into someone else's nightmare, a world of federal agents and false identities that existed parallel to his simple life of honest work and small-town routine. But the fear in Isabel's eyes had been real, and real fear deserved real protection, even from people who claimed to offer help. That night, as Carter lay in bed listening to the house settle around him, every creak and whisper took on sinister meaning. Ruby slept peacefully in the next room, her breathing steady and trusting, unaware that their quiet life had suddenly become complicated by forces beyond their understanding. Carter found himself thinking about the photo that had fallen from Isabel's purse, the image of a man whose face had been deliberately torn away. He thought about Mila's flinching reflex and Isabel's hypervigilance, the pieces of a puzzle that suggested violence and fear and secrets too dangerous to share. The realization that he cared enough to put himself and Ruby at risk should have terrified him, but instead it felt like waking up after a long, dreamless sleep. The sound of a car engine at 11:30 that night brought Carter to his window, where he watched Isabel's Honda pull into his driveway, with headlights dark and engine running rough. She emerged from the driver's seat carrying a sleeping Mila, her movements quick and desperate and laced with the kind of fear that made rational decisions impossible. Carter met her at the back door of the garage, his bare feet cold against concrete as he took in her wild eyes and shaking hands. "They found us," she whispered, her voice breaking on the words. "We're leaving tonight." The admission hung between them like a bridge burning, irreversible and final, and heartbreaking in its honesty. The truth, when it finally came, arrived in fragments scattered across the garage floor like pieces of broken glass. Isabel's real name was Isabel Santos, and her husband Vincent had been an accountant for the Torino crime family in Boston until his conscience had finally outweighed his fear. "They killed him before he could testify," she said, the words delivered with the flat affect of someone who had repeated them too many times to cry anymore. Mila wasn't her biological daughter, but Vincent's child from his first marriage, a little girl Isabel had adopted and loved and risked everything to protect when the bullets started flying and the safe houses started burning. "I witnessed Vincent's murder," Isabel continued, her voice gaining strength as the truth finally found its way into open air. "I have evidence, financial records, recorded conversations, enough to destroy their entire operation. But they've been hunting us for 2 years, moving from safe house to safe house, never staying anywhere long enough to feel human." The federal agents who had visited Carter's garage weren't real FBI, but hired hunters, professional trackers employed by the Torino family to eliminate loose ends and silence witnesses. The game of cat and mouse had led them from Boston to Hartford to Millbrook, each move bringing the predators closer to their prey. Carter's mind reeled as he processed the magnitude of Isabel's deception, the careful construction of lies that had allowed her to survive in his world of honest work and simple truths. Everything he thought he knew about her had been performance, from her name to her backstory to her reasons for being in Millbrook. But the chemistry between them had been real, and so had her tenderness with Ruby and his own growing attachment to Mila. "You brought killers to my town," he said, the words coming out harder than he intended. "You put Ruby at risk." The accusation hit its mark, and Isabel's careful composure crumbled like sand castles before incoming tide. "I never meant for this to happen," she whispered, tears finally breaching the dam of her self-control. "I should never have let myself care about you." The admission hung between them like a confession, raw and honest and impossible to take back. Carter felt his anger dissolving in the face of her genuine anguish, replaced by something deeper and more dangerous than mere attraction. "But you did," he said quietly. "And so did Ruby. And so did I." The words surprised him with their truth, the realization that somewhere between fixing her car and sharing dinner, he had begun to rebuild the part of himself that Linda's death had torn away. The sound of car engines cutting through the night air brought their conversation to an abrupt halt, multiple vehicles moving with purpose toward the garage. Isabel's face went white with terror as she recognized the sound of her pursuers, the hunters who had tracked them across 2 states and 3 identities without ever losing the scent. "They're here," she breathed, gathering the still sleeping Mila against her chest. "We have to run." But Carter was already moving, his protective instincts overriding his survival instincts as he guided them toward the back office, where steel doors and thick walls might buy them precious time. The confrontation with Torres and his partner played out like a scene from someone else's nightmare, with Carter standing between trained killers and the woman he had begun to love without quite realizing it. "Where are they, Hayes?" Torres demanded, his gun drawn but not yet pointed. confident in his ability to extract information through intimidation alone. Carter's answer came from a place of courage he didn't know he possessed, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "I told you before. Never seen them." The lie felt like armor, protecting something more valuable than his own safety. The physical altercation that followed was brief and brutal, with Carter's years of manual labor proving surprisingly effective against men accustomed to victims who cooperated out of fear. When Torres hit the concrete floor with a socket wrench print on his forehead, Carter felt a savage satisfaction that should have worried him, but instead felt like justice finally arriving at its destination. "Get out of my garage," he growled, the words carrying all the authority of a man defending his territory and his family. The fake agents retreated, but not before making threats that hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. The arrival of Detective Brooks felt like deliverance until Carter realized that another layer of deception was about to unfold, that the man who had seemed like a threat in the diner was actually salvation, wearing an unexpected uniform. "Special Agent Brooks, Federal Bureau of Investigation," he said, producing credentials that felt more authentic than anything Torres had carried. The explanation that followed rewrote everything Carter thought he understood about Isabel's situation, revealing a truth more complex and hopeful than anything she had dared to believe during 2 years of running and hiding. Vincent Santos was alive, hidden in witness protection, while the FBI built their case against the Torino family and searched for the wife and daughter who had vanished before they could explain the plan. "He's been looking for his daughter for 2 years," Brooks explained, his voice gentle with understanding of the tragedy that had separated a family through good intentions gone awry. The irony was almost unbearable. Isabel had been running from the very people trying to protect her, and Vincent had been searching for the family he thought he had lost to his own noble stupidity. The reunion between Vincent and Isabel played out in Carter's garage like a scene from a movie he didn't want to watch. 2 people who had loved each other finding themselves on opposite sides of a chasm created by fear and misunderstanding. Vincent looked older and grayer than the photo Isabel carried, worn down by 2 years of isolation and uncertainty. "You're supposed to be dead," Isabel whispered, her voice thick with emotions too complex for simple words. "I had to let you think that," Vincent replied, his own voice breaking with the weight of decisions that had seemed necessary at the time, but felt cruel in retrospect. Mila's confusion when she woke to find a stranger claiming to be her father was heartbreaking in its innocence, her 6-year-old mind struggling to process concepts that adults found difficult to understand. "No," she said, hiding behind Isabel with the fierce loyalty of a child who had learned to trust only one person in a world full of danger. "Carter is my daddy now." The words hit Vincent like physical blows, each syllable driving home the cost of his noble sacrifice and good intentions. Carter felt his own heart breaking for all of them, for Vincent, who had lost 2 years with his daughter, for Isabel, who had carried impossible burdens alone, and for Mila, who was being asked to navigate emotional territory that would challenge seasoned adults. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance of healing and adjustment, with FBI-recommended family therapists and carefully supervised visits designed to rebuild bonds that had been severed by circumstances beyond anyone's control. Vincent relocated to a safe house within driving distance of Millbrook, his witness protection status allowing for a new identity, but not yet a normal life. The process of reintroducing him to Mila required patience that tested everyone involved, but gradually the little girl began to recognize traces of herself in his face and mannerisms. Carter found himself playing an unexpected role in this unconventional family reconstruction, serving as neutral ground where Mila felt safe enough to explore her relationship with Vincent without abandoning her attachment to Isabel. The garage became a sanctuary where a traumatized family could begin to heal, surrounded by the honest sounds of productive work and the comforting presence of someone who asked for nothing but their safety and happiness. Ruby embraced her expanded family with the adaptability of childhood, delighting in having more people to love and more stories to hear. Isabel's transformation from hunted fugitive to healing woman happened gradually, like watching a flower bloom in time-lapse photography. The constant hypervigilance began to fade as federal protection became real rather than theoretical, replaced by something resembling normal human emotion. She took a legitimate job at the local bank, her financial expertise valuable in a world where she could finally use her real name and her actual skills. "For the first time in years, I can plan for tomorrow," she told Carter one evening as they watched their children play in the garage, her voice filled with wonder at the simple concept of future tense. The relationship between Carter and Isabel developed slowly, built on foundations of honesty that had been laid in concrete and tested by fire. "Can we build something real on a foundation of lies?" Carter asked during one of their long conversations, his voice carrying the uncertainty of a man who had learned to guard his heart carefully. "Everything I told you about loving you was true," Isabel replied, her eyes holding his with the steady gaze of someone who had finally stopped running. The admission hung between them like a bridge, fragile but functional, connecting two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances. Vincent's gradual acceptance of the situation showed a maturity that impressed everyone involved, including federal agents who had seen witness protection cases destroy families rather than preserve them. "You've been more her mother than I ever was her father," he told Isabel one afternoon, watching her help Mila with homework while Carter taught Ruby and Mila basic automotive maintenance. The generosity of his admission spoke to a love deeper than possession, the kind of selfless affection that puts a child's well-being above an adult's wounded pride. 6 months later, spring arrived in Millbrook, with the kind of gentle warmth that made promises feel possible and futures seem achievable. Hayes Auto Repair had officially become Hayes Family Auto, with a new sign that reflected the expanded definition of family that had emerged from chaos and fear. The garage served as both workplace and community center, a place where honest work was done and complicated families found ways to function despite their unconventional structure. The Saturday morning ritual of teaching both girls basic mechanical skills had become one of Carter's favorite parts of the week, watching Ruby's confidence blend with Mila's careful attention to detail. Isabel's organizational skills had transformed the garage's business practices, bringing efficiency and profitability to work that had always been more about helping people than making money. Vincent's weekend visits had evolved from awkward, supervised encounters to natural family time, with all the adults working together to provide Mila with the stability she had been missing for most of her young life. Mrs. Peterson's weekly delivery of fresh cookies had become an institution, her motherly attention extending to encompass what she called my extended family, with the practical affection of someone who understood that love comes in many forms. The community of Millbrook had embraced their unconventional arrangement with the kind of small-town acceptance that asked no questions but offered unlimited support. Frank at the diner had started setting aside a large table every Sunday morning, knowing that 6 people would arrive for breakfast and stories and the kind of easy conversation that healthy families take for granted. The final scene of their story played out on an ordinary Saturday morning that felt extraordinary in its simple contentment. Carter was closing the garage for the day, the familiar ritual of organizing tools and shutting down equipment marking the transition from work time to family time. Mila approached him with the serious expression she wore when wrestling with important thoughts, her 6-year-old face composed with the gravity of someone preparing to share profound wisdom. "Remember when I asked you to marry Mommy?" she said, her voice carrying the careful precision of a child who had learned that words mattered more than most adults realized. Carter knelt to her level, his rough hands gentle as he smoothed a strand of hair away from her face. "I remember," he replied, his voice soft with affection for this little girl who had walked into his life with impossible requests and revolutionary honesty. "I don't need you to marry her anymore." Myla continued, her statement delivered with the confidence of someone who had solved a complex puzzle through careful observation and logical thinking. "Why's that?" Carter asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Mila's smile was radiant with the kind of happiness that comes from understanding something important about the world and your place in it. "Because we're already a family," she said simply. "Marriage is just a piece of paper, right?" The wisdom in her words came from Ruby, who had explained family in terms that made sense to a child who had experienced too much uncertainty in her short life. "Families are people who show up for each other every day," Ruby had said, and Mila had absorbed this definition like gospel truth. As the sun set over Millbrook, Connecticut, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that would have made Linda smile, Carter looked around his garage and saw something he had never expected to find again. Home. Not the building or the business, but the collection of people who had chosen each other despite impossible circumstances and competing loyalties. Isabel gathered tools with the competence of someone who belonged in this space, while Vincent helped Ruby organize spare parts with the patience of a man who understood second chances. Mila moved between all the adults with the confidence of a child who knew she was loved by everyone present, her laughter echoing off garage walls that had witnessed heartbreak and healing in equal measure. The sign on the garage door, handwritten by Ruby in her careful script, read, "Family isn't perfect. It's just people who keep showing up." Below it, Mila had added her own contribution in crayon. "Every day is a choice. We choose to stay." As Carter turned off the lights and locked the door, leaving only a small window open to let in the Connecticut air that carried promises of tomorrow, he understood that some families are born, some are chosen, and the best ones are built one day at a time by people brave enough to believe that broken things can be made whole again.